Hi, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this panel about the vision about museums in the post-COVID era as a start to this symposium. I'm very grateful to the organizers of the International Symposium to have trusted me to come up with a great panel to do that conversation. And so I'm happy to present to you today following speakers. And first and foremost, I would say, because of the latest actuality in Science Museum, Chevy Humphrey, who just recently has been appointed as the new President CEO of the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. So congratulations, Chevy. When we look at your bio here on the screen, this is certainly well deserved. And I'm not going to read all of this, you can see it, but Chevy has been president of the CEO of the Arizona Science Center since 2005 and created a strong nonprofit organization that has adopted best practices for business. She leads with self-management, entrepreneurship, and strategically deployed resources to gain market share and respect, donor confidence, and public support. She's a global leader in informal science education. She served as the chair of the board of the American Alliance of Museums, which is larger than Science Museum Field, as you know, and the biggest organization in the United States. And she has been chair of the board of the Association of Science and Technology Centers as well. And so, as I said before, soon in January, to become the new president CEO of the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. So congratulations again, Chevy, and thanks for joining us here in this conversation. Meng, many of you know, he's the chief executive of the Science Center Singapore, and also professor of biological sciences at the National University. In Singapore, he contributes to science education and outreach and champions STEM applied learning programs in schools for the Ministry of Education. He has given numerous talks to popularize science locally and globally. He has a large portfolio of positions that he has in several scientific and academic organizations. He is elected fellow of the Singapore National Academy of Sciences and fellow of the Singapore Institute of Biology. He serves as president of the Asia Pacific Network of Science and Technology Centers since 2016. And he has also been serving at the board of ASTEC for a number of years. Michael John Gorman, and move this here, is a founding director of BIOTOPIA, a new museum for life sciences and environment in development in Munich in Germany. And he's professor of life sciences in society in the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich. He was the founder of Science Gallery and the Global Science Gallery Network, university link space for creative collisions between science and art. And we all have heard of that because it has been developing from Dublin to London, Melbourne, Bangalore, Rotterdam, and Atlanta in the United States. He just published a new book about the future of museums, Idea Colliders, the Future of Science Museums at MIT Press. So this is quite a unique panel, I'm quite sure, and I'm very happy that they have been willing to join me for this conversation. I'm Walter Staveloz, former executive director of Excite and director for international relations at ASTEC, and now helping the field as a consultant. So how this is going to work is that we will certainly not discuss about the impact that COVID has had on museums. In the past, we know that has been a dramatic impact, that lots of people have lost their jobs, and it's a societal crisis, that's for sure. We're not going to speak about that. We also will not speak about reopening strategies because that's been done in many places, but what we will focus on is what the field could or should look like after the COVID is over and we go to what we call the new normal. And we have three parts in our conversation. First, we would like to look at what societal trends are being identified that might influence the future. The second part will be how that affects the museums directly. And finally, our three panelists will be able to give their own personal view on how they think the field will look like, and that will be our conclusion. You will be able to ask questions, and the organizers of the symposium will tell you how to do that. And at the end of the symposium, we will somehow try to find a way to respond to them. And so without further ado, I would like to start with TM. I read your biography, but I also know that besides that, you are a gardener, right? That's something that I did.
Yes. Yes, I'm a gardener. Yes.
And so it's interesting to see that many people that we talk to every day have a number of passions that we don't know anything about. And so I'm happy to share that with the field. So how is it going? Are things growing?
Oh yes. Well, I must tell you that when I was young, I spent 10 years in a farm. So I'm very close. I'm very close to nature, and that could be why I ended up majoring in zoology and became a professor in biology, right? And during the COVID, our circuit breakers time, we are at home a lot. So we experimented even with more things. And Singapore is also moving towards trying to sustain our own food production. So we are given seeds for crops from our national parks. So we have started growing things, and we just harvested our lettuce. So we are growing eggplants, and other than all this, of course, the beauty of all the flowers that are blooming all the time. So you see on my Facebook, I always post beautiful gardening pictures. Great. So to cheer us up, especially during this very depressed time. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and so, well, I already said Chevy that, you know, what the news is with her. But one thing about Chevy also that you may not know is she's a singer, right? And you have been singing in a blues band, I'm sure, right?
Wow.
So, will you entertain us at the end of this panel?
Yeah, I'll get to that. That would be a lot of fun.
Blues would be great in Chicago. That'll be a
yes, exactly.
Great place for blues.
Yes.
And Michael, you know, and I like to do this because, you know, I make this panel a little bit more personal, and so that we know who we are talking and making it a little bit closer to the audiences. Michael, you have had an incident, or not so, it's an incident. You have been riding in a taxi somewhere in the US with a big rock group or a pop group, right? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, I was trying to think of something bizarre that nobody would know about me, and for your question, and I ended up at midnight in riding around Boston with Jizza from the Wu-Tang Clan, and the Wu-Tang Clan is a famous American hip hop outfit, and Jizza is really one half of the core of the Wu-Tang Clan with RZA, but the interesting thing is that Jizza actually is passionate about science communication, and he has created a program called Rap Genius, where he gets kids, particularly in the Bronx, to create rap around scientific themes. And I was at this event with him, and we ended up riding around Boston for about an hour at midnight in a taxi, and it was fascinating, just an amazing adventure.
And what is amazing is that when we go personal with people of our panel, we immediately land back into the topic that we want to address, right? So that's the interesting part of this. And so as a reminder, we start the first conversation now about what are the societal trends that we have identified. And I think that one of the major things that we have seen and that people tend to say is there is a much bigger expectation and trust in experts today than it was before. So I'd like to hear from you if that's something that you have been experiencing as well.
Yeah, I've just, trust is very important. And I think that we as science museums have garnered that trust with our communities. And it's important that we maintain that. And safety, that is something, following the science is going to be critical moving forward. And our visitors are going to expect that. We're finding that in Arizona, that people are coming. We're breaking the mold of the attendance numbers because of that trust. and because they know that they feel safe and they are in an environment where they can engage freely, because we're going to protect them and give them the science.
Mm-hmm. Is that the same for you, Tian?
Yes, absolutely so. And in fact, when we were facing this COVID crisis, we already went into cleaning up our place, and we are certified as SG Clean. And when we are allowed to reopen, one thing we want to make sure is to let people know about safe distancing. So we came up with props, like a UFO spaceship using umbrella, and then our staff put on the space shuttle, and we make it in such a way it's a 1 meter radius. Mm-hmm. And became I must take photograph with this. So when they came, we actually tell them that you have to keep the safe distancing. And we are a trusted science center. I was also invited to go to on radio and television to talk about why are people fearful of this. So we need to understand the virus. At the same time, we want to understand the psychology of fear, because there were a lot of rumors spreading around, and there were panic buying, panic grabbing of toilet rolls and all kinds. It's crazy. So we have to go into talking about fear and phobia, because at the Science Center, we have an exhibition on phobia. So we are in a way trusted to even go into understanding the psychology of why people are behaving in such way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Michael?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting that TM is both a biologist and a Science Center leader. And the fact that he's being invited on the radio to talk about this is very interesting, because I think we've seen this huge rise in trust in scientists and trust in experts during the pandemic. And, I think the Edelman Trust Barometer, which comes out every year, this year it says that 85% of people now say we need to hear more from the scientists and less from the politicians. Mm-hmm. So you have these kind of science stars that have emerged, like Dr. Fauci, but also right here where I am in Germany, there's a guy called Christian Drosten, who is the head of the virology in the Charité in Berlin. And his podcast comes out every day. And people really love it. They listen to it every day. And in a way, it makes us ask the question, why do we need science centers and science museums anymore if people can hear directly from the horse's mouth? Oh. And so I think that is an interesting challenge to us.
And that's something that we will address in the part 2 or 3, I guess. But yeah, and I was going to say, yes, scientists are considered as experts, but when we say experts, are they uniquely scientists, or are there other people that we can consider as experts in these times? Or would there be other voices that we think people can look at or listen to?
Well, I would just quickly jump in, because in Singapore, when we were hit quite badly, we have our ministerial committee. Our ministers, they are involved, and every day there's a panel of briefing and discussion with chief medical doctors and so on. So I think other than scientists, you also want to listen to people who control so-called implementation policies and so on. So our Minister of Manpower was around, because we talk about jobs, and that part is important, because other than trying to keep ourselves safe, you still need to get the economy going. So how are our so-called policymakers, our Ministry for Education and Ministry of Trade, looking into all these things? So it's not just science. I think you have to look into the whole social aspect and the economy. Yeah.
Exactly.
When we reopened, we actually developed an exhibit on the pandemic, and we actually highlighted scientists and their findings and quotes, and we're constantly updating that, so we can get the public to understand how to follow the science and who are some of the renowned scientists for them to follow. And that is an iterative process that we've developed in the Science Center, because people now, when they come, they actually look for that, because they're like, okay, what's new? Oh. And I think that we have an incredible opportunity to interpret and cut through all of the noise out there to really help our visitors understand, what we're experiencing and how to use the science to take care of ourselves and be safe and be better community and citizens.
Yeah, thank you. And we have to move on, and I think we all agree on this, on this very special notion and very particular. But we also see different trends, like it looks like people are willing to behave differently today than they did before. And if you compare to how people act according to climate change, for example, which is a real threat as well, they don't seem to be as quickly willing to change attitudes and behaviors because of that threat. But here with COVID, that has been changing, right?
Yeah, I think that you can really see that if people feel that there's a direct threat to their health, an extraordinary level of behavior change is possible, which we've just seen in the last few months. And you're exactly right, Walter. You know, the question is if we can do it for COVID, which is a big threat for sure, but you know, will likely be gone in a year or two. Why can't we do it for climate change and also the biodiversity crash, which are in a way much greater threats to humans and to the rest of the planet? And I think it's perhaps one thing we might have learned from this experience is that, you know, maybe if we think about framing climate change in terms of the health consequences, that could be actually powerful, you know, the effect of climate change on disease. So, for example, with plastics, when people first learned that that we all have microplastics in our body, and that actually, you know, it's in our bloodstream and it's in our babies, suddenly people became extremely concerned about plastics. So, and that actually helped with triggering behavior change. So I think there are definitely some lessons we can take from that link with health, which could actually help us in discussing climate change and also biodiversity.
And I think that's a good point, and I've heard that from Greta Thunberg herself, saying exactly, I am still acting on climate change. I know the priority today is different, but what we can learn from how people change behaviors today should help us to strategize against climate change after that. So I'm quite sure. Do we all agree on that, DM and Chevy? Yeah.
Yes, and just a quick point that is during this so-called lockdown close-up period, we notice nature even more. In fact, Singaporeans are discovering a lot of wildlife in our urbanized place, and I think that brings about the awareness of biodiversity, and I think that's very powerful. Yeah.
And maybe going a little bit further, I see a number of voices that say that people are now questioning the society as a global. We were not able to handle this because we had seen that coming. We could see that coming. It has not been handled. So is the way we operate as a society actually the right way of doing things? These questions come up as well, TM.
Yes, I mean, but I think at the end of the day, it's still the science. You have the scientific basis of how you implement policy. And that's the reason why our government always go back to science, saying that based on science, initially we don't quite understand the virus, and the initial understanding was only when you're sick that you need to put on the mask. So we were trying to just get the mask to all those people who are not well, and then give the mask to all the hospital workers and frontline workers. But later, when science shows that the virus can be spread, even asymptomatic virus spreading from asymptomatic people, and that's when the government started to even issue out. We all have got free masks nationwide. We have 3 tranches of masks given to us, and I think that also helped us to mitigate the control. Mm-hmm. So science is still the deciding factor of what should or should not be done.
Yeah. Chevy, do you agree that people question organization of society because of the weak response that we have had to the COVID? So, you know, and also I'm sorry to say also the link between that happening and the rest of our environmental views about society.
Yeah, what we found is really helpful, and what TM and Michael John are saying is that we actually try to provide those real experiences when visitors come in. So we do experiments, and we show if you know, we actually have a spray bottle where we spray bottle the mask, and you see if the water goes through, and if not, and we have people stand on the other side to see, you know, does this really work? We also have real life experiences on, you know, going outside, being citizen scientists and exploring nature. And we show pictures of what it looked like before COVID and what it looks like now when people aren't going outside. And so showing those real time, real life experiences when people come in, they are able to connect because they were able to identify and see the differences and experience it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, Michael, maybe last word on this.
Yeah, I mean, both TM and Chevy have alluded to, this new awareness of nature and citizen science opportunities during this strange period that we've just been through. And we did a project which was maybe an example of how to tune into that, which was that we noticed that there was a silence during the pandemic of human activity. So you had less cars on the roads and you had less airplanes in the skies. And suddenly you could hear birdsong much more clearly. So we initiated a project called Dawn Chorus, where we got people all over the world to go out and make recordings with smartphones of the birds, because people were under lockdown as well in their homes. So they could actually go out in the morning and record the birds. And we found that thousands of people around the world wanted to get involved and wanted to share their local Dawn Chorus. And it wasn't just a way to connect with your local biodiversity, which I think was quite strong for people at that moment, but it was also a way to connect people across different locations and to discover something through the ears, which is very precious and very local. So I fully agree that this was a moment where people suddenly had a new awareness of nature and a new connection with it, which would be great to kind of harness for the future.
Exactly, and I think these were the three major points that we have identified: the trust in experts, changing attitudes, and a new vision about the environment and the place that the humans have in the environment. Basic main things that we've seen over this period. But there are also negative things, right? And so, for example, we know very clearly that underserved populations suffer much more from the COVID than others. In the US, 2.8 times more death in the African American community, in the Latino community, and that goes together. And these are two maybe different but linked points. Is that we've seen also the increase in the digital divide, because in the way that we need to respond to the crisis and give people opportunities to learn and to educate themselves, these underserved populations are suffering twice, because not only they are suffering more, but they have less access to solutions, so to say. So I'd like to hear your comments on that. Maybe Chevy, want to start with that?
My parents always told me knowledge is power. And you have to make sure that you not only present these messages and provide these opportunities for your visitors, but you have to take that to the communities. And that's something that is really important, that, we live beyond in science museums, beyond our walls, and we've got to get out of our museums and go to communities and spread those messages and create those opportunities to enhance people's knowledge, because it's really knowledge based. They just don't have access to the same information as everyone else. And it's our responsibility as museums to do that, because we serve the community. And that's something that we take very seriously in Arizona. And I'm soon to be going to MSI Chicago, and it's something that has got to be critical, that connection with communities. And even now, even more after, not even after COVID, but we're still in the midst of COVID, we found that connectivity to our communities is even greater. And so I think that, I know we're going to talk about this, but I think the future of our museums is really going to be based on that connectivity that we have, and a deeper engagement with our community and with our society.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with what Chevy said. And I want to address the part about digital divide, have or do not have. We roll out a lot of online content, and we really throughout communication, as well as for school and for family learning. And when the society reacted to say that, hey, we do not have all students, especially the underprivileged students, having that device. One thing good about Singapore is our government really look at education very seriously. So straight away, there's mobilization, and every child at home without a laptop will given a laptop. So now everybody in Singapore, every school kids will have access. And that's also enabling us to do even more of such online outreach to the families.
Michael?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think TM and Chevy have said it all almost, but just to, I think you're absolutely right that this pandemic has really shone a torch on inequality in a very powerful way, and also shone a light on perhaps working situations that we weren't aware of. You know, like for example, here in Germany, there were a number of outbreaks in meat processing plants, and we've really seen how, you know, learned a lot about the kind of inhuman conditions in such places. We've learned a lot about the conditions for migrant workers, and this is, you know, I think a learning that, you know, has to also go into how we think about such places in the future. We've also learned, which is quite interesting, what an essential worker is and what is not an essential worker. And I'm sorry to say it, but unfortunately, museum people are not essential workers. You know, we're talking about healthcare, sanitation, food, you know, these are really the essential services in society. So I think it's interesting for us to think as non-essential workers, what can we do to make a difference?
Yeah, and I'm happy you say that, because I think even if our intentions are good, we were closed very quickly. And what is the image that we have in our community when we are closed? How do they see our role, right, in such a period? And so what you say is that, well, you know, we have not been the ones who have been providing the essential services. So that's one of the conversations that we will need to have in the future is, you know, how do you maintain this image that you are essential in society or not, right? And that may be the third part.
You know, I'd like to add to that because, you know, I thought that at first, and I talked to the head of our largest medical provider in the state. And he said he had a different flip to that. He said, you are essential because you are helping to educate the community to make better decisions. And it is your responsibility as a science center and science museum to carry out those messages for us and to make sure that those messages are consistent. And so, you know, it was just a different perspective that I got from someone in the medical field, that they relied on us to tell those messages. So on our building, we've actually put banners around saying mask up and actually promoting those things. So we found a way to be even more important and adding that value and pushing those messages in our community.
And that is great how you turn around a situation that is actually in the beginning a very difficult situation. TM.
Yeah, I also want to add on, because I agree with Chevy, because when the school all shut down and the students got to learn from home, our Minister of Education turned to us, say, can you quickly roll out your outreach and programs? We even came out with an animation to teach the children how to wash their hands, how to mask up and all that. And we became a so-called a provider of online resources to help parents, because the parents said, I'm going to stay at home, I'm going to work from home, I'm going to look after children who's screaming and running all over the place. So we roll out a lot of online things. We even develop online experiments, and we roll out regular programs to engage the family. So we became essential in that sense for home-based learning and also for communicating proper behavior of coping with the stress. Yeah.
And that is great, and I totally agree that is some way to turn around, as Chevy said, a negative situation for us and making a strength and reaffirming for the future what your role is in society. If you have not been doing it so far, this is the occasion to do it. So, but let me come back to one point, because it's not as easy as that at the end of the day. We spoke about the underserved populations that have been affected by that mostly. You know, and as you said, Michael, these are the people who work in the restaurants, who drive the buses, who are on the front line. They deliver the food to your house. They are at risk. And in the African American community, even more, there are underlying conditions like diabetes and overweight and all of these things that make it really difficult. The point that I want to make is that when we look at our tradition, and even if we say we are relevant to our communities, large parts of these populations are not science center visitors. So how do you in the future be proactive in making to reach out to these people, because we are now compassionate, we understand what their situation is. How can we actually be more active with them?
I think we go to them. I think we have to go to them, and we have to make sure we're in their communities and make sure they understand what we do, how we serve them, and make sure that we provide them with the proper tools to make better decisions. I think free days are very important. I truly believe that we need to go to those communities because that's really the key.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that one thing that some of our organizations have learned during this time is how to go to them. I mean, I think that's, you know, how to actually not be reliant on building visitors and how to think differently, whether it's making a TV studio in your science center or whether it's sending out kits to people's homes. This has been a time where there's been some really interesting experimentation in ways of actually thinking, as Chevy says, outside the walls. And those, you know, many of the people you're talking about, unfortunately, are really unlikely to come into a science center or museum for a large number of structural reasons. So just and also during the pandemic, this has been exacerbated because people have really been focused on different needs, you know, really at the lower level of Maslow's pyramid of needs, and, you know, physiological needs and safety have been paramount. So I think I would hope that from the pandemic, many institutions have tried out and experimented with new ways of going outside their buildings. And I've seen cool examples of that, but I think that's hopefully something that we will take with us. And it doesn't just mean digital. I think that's also an important point, that it also means going into communities. It also means you know, making kits and also shifting your focus, like TM was saying, you know, hand washing. You know, if people need education about hand washing, you know, that's, you know, what kind of organization is better suited to provide that than a science center?
So does that mean?
Add to that, Michael, because I would like to, Michael John, I would like to say it would be awesome too, and this is what we've been trying to do, is providing the PPE, as TM is doing, going in the communities and providing the masks, providing whatever they need as resources in addition to the science kits.
So what I'm hearing is that, and that's some way what I'm thinking as well, is that we have always had over the last years this vision that we need to be relevant in the communities and that we need to do. But I think that maybe the intensity by which we think about that has shifted a little bit, and that becoming relevant to the communities may be a little different after the pandemic than it was before. Do you agree with me?
You mean intensity of engaging the community?
Intensity is maybe not the right word, but that we need to think. I would say that we should be more humble and listening to what the real problems are in the community and trying to respond to them, rather than only thinking that we bring something to them that they need. See what I mean? Michael, do you see what I mean?
Well, I do see what you mean, but I think that, you know, it's a balance between kind of doing what we are best at and you know, I've seen some really radical changes of the purposes of museums during the pandemic. I mean, some very dark. So, for example, the Irish Museum of Modern Art became a morgue for a while during the pandemic, which is about as tough as it gets. But other museums have, you know, opened their spaces up for distance, you know, socially distanced learning and so on for school children. But on the other hand, I mean, we are living through a really critical time for science and for science communication. And I think that if one thinks, for example, about even such a thing as the vaccine, you know, and attitudes towards vaccines, less people now are willing to take a vaccine than they were at the beginning of the pandemic. So less people would consume a vaccine, because as this trust in science is rising, strangely enough, anti-vax movements and similar are also on the rise. So I think as science centers and science museums, you really think, what can we do in this environment? How can we find a new way to work with scientists and to actually engage people around science? Of course, there are some basic needs that we could also potentially satisfy, but I think, and maybe in the crisis, it makes sense to do that. But I think we need to come back to these key crises that the planet is facing right now, where we can actually have an important role.
So what I think with intensity I meant is even more focus on the relation to the community than before, is what I probably meant. Chevy?
I don't have much to add. I mean, Michael John really covered a lot of it. But I do believe that providing the equipment and the proper equipment to communities is going to be really critical. And we need to play a part in doing that. And I think it's our responsibility to do that.
Okay, that's a great answer. And I believe that we will see that a lot happening in the future. But that will also mean that we need to identify what the asks are, what the audiences will ask from us. And so do we know today what these new asks will be in the future, or do we think that they have not changed? So is there a change in what people expect from us, from your point of view, DM?
I would see families and teachers also looking towards us because we have, okay, Singapore has always wanted to test how to become a smart nation, and we want to enable learning more from home, and also allowing a lot of independent learning. One of the philosophy that we believe in is you teach less to learn more, and Science Center become a very important part for that. And I think that is something that we would want to go into. We want to be like the largest applied learning science classroom in the nation, and also enabling a lot of this self-directed learning. So the Science Center has got to be very good in science communication, and also having a lot of good infrastructure to enable even experimentation. I can imagine in the future we won't have IoT, Internet of Things, to enable students to come and set up experiments, and they can monitor from classroom and so on. So that is how we are seeing ourselves playing up our main core role to be more engaging and more empowering to learners of all age.
So again, my question, Michael, to you is as well, what do you think the public, that visitors will ask after the COVID? Do they have same expectations than before, or will they be changing? I would say, and as many other people say, that the focus of audiences will be on health and well-being, right? Is that something that we will have to take into account?
Yeah, I mean, so I think if we're thinking about beyond the pandemic, you know, when it's no longer with us, that I believe that museums are going to be incredibly social. And I think the real thirst that people will have is for community. So of course, health and well-being will be important topics, and will continue to be of great interest for a long time. But I really think that we are going to have an absolute burst of desire for community among the visitors after the pandemic. And you know, after the 1918 flu pandemic, there was a huge baby boom. I mean, that's one example of this thirst. But I think our museums are going to, but I think we really need to think about how we can facilitate social connections in our museums, because that is what people will want after this experience of isolation and anxiety that we've all been through.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What do you think, Chevy? What will be the expectations?
I agree that, you know, we as science museums are going to have to be agile and be adaptive to those needs. And I think that we need to design for social distancing. We need to design our spaces, and I would say physical distancing, not social distancing, but physical distancing. And we need to design and promote this physical distancing, yet not obstruct that social interaction. And that is going to be something that is going to be really key to build a great emphasis on circulation zones for visitors to experience our content, while but also allowing for pause and reflection. And that's something that we've done during COVID, is that pause and reflection, and to have a space where there's a discussion and there's a richer museum experience. Yes. I think those are things that we need to think about, and we need to be thinking about it right now and prototyping and testing it while we're reopening.
So I think that that's a great segue to our last part, and I'd like to invite you now to to give your vision about the post-COVID Science Museum. And maybe I start to end this conversation, and maybe we start with you, TM, and then Michael, and then Chevy as the last one. So TM, what's your big vision about the post-COVID?
Well, we have quite a few, and I think the COVID situation has and accelerated the way we want to use digital. So digital is certainly will be something with us, and we are going a lot more to the blended way of engaging our audiences. So imagine that before they come to the Science Center, already we engage them online, and then when they are with us, we engage them in a very rich, very immersive. I call that an epic journey. It's very experimental, experiential, participatory, and interactive, at the same time connected to the community, connected to the knowledge in the internet and so on. So it's an epic journey coming to the Science Center. So pre, during, and post, after they left, we can continue to engage them using online. And because of this COVID, we have developed a lot of platform for that. And I think that will continue to strengthen us. And I want to also echo what Chevy has said. We also realize that community is important, and we also want to move towards making Science Center a place. We call it place making. That is, you come there, you come to the Science Center to also engage in what you believe in. It's not citizen science per se, but a lot of community issues like aging population, like the youth, the way how they worry about the uncertainty, the VUCA world. And you want to make Science Center a very safe place for this kind of discussion. And of course, one last bit which I like to emphasize is the UN SDG, the SDG 2030, and we want to continue to play a critical role. And with this pandemic, we can see ourselves as very fragile on this planet Earth, and we do not use science and STEM as a power to come up with solutioning. Plus STEAM, you have to include all the humanity and philosophy and social sciences. We will probably be paralyzed again if anything had hit us. Yeah. So these are some of the broad directions that we are moving towards.
Thank you so much, TM. Michael?
Yeah, well, the book that I just published, Idea Colliders, The Future of Science Museums, actually starts with a previous pandemic, the swine flu pandemic of 2009, which was less lethal than Corona. But the book describes a number of shifts in our cultural institutions, which are happening, and that we're moving from large institutions to small ones, slow to fast, from stable to agile, as Chevy was saying. And what I think is going to happen is that this experience, this episode, is going to accelerate this disruption. Also because this episode has forced many of our institutions to act in new ways and to explore new ways to reach the public. So I think that we are going to see these shifts really manifesting in a new generation, a kind of a Darwinian evolution of the Science Center and the Science Museum, where we have new, more agile forms of engagement emerging. And at the heart of it, I think, is this idea of a more social experience, of engaging, connecting across boundaries. So we're living in a society where we're ever more fragmented, and we have these echo chambers, and we have the physical isolation of the pandemic. I think the future is about this new kinds of social connections and getting out of the filter bubble and engaging with people in the flesh.
Yeah. Thank you. And Chevy, you have the last word here.
Well, I'm not gonna. I agree with TM and Michael John as well, but I would like to just go a little bit deeper. But I think our visitors are likely, it's going to be a slow process back to our what we call normal, post-pandemic world, and they may opt for personal interactions over shared and public elements. I do think people are craving to be together, but they're still apprehensive. And I think that we in our museums will need to think differently, and we need to meld the hybrid of online and in person. And these can include disposable recycled devices that we develop and we create, such as a Google Cardboard, or virtual tools, such as apps loaded onto their personal devices that would enhance their experiences around a particular exhibit, where they're able to interact with each other on their cell phones and not be close post together, but they can send pictures and emojis about what they think about their experiences. So I think we just need to open our minds up and be prepared for, what, and hear them. I always tell my team, we need to listen to hear, and we need to hear what our visitors are saying and hear what our community needs and fill that need.
No, I totally agree with that. And thank you for saying that. And I think it's a very nice conclusion to this panel. We have to listen more than we have been doing before. And that will probably change the way that we do our job, and it will change the face of public engagement as well, I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for your contribution to this panel. I hope that we will get a lot of questions. I think there is a lot of food for questions and comments. I hope they will come, and we're happy to answer them somehow at the end of this symposium. Thanks again to the organizers for making this possible. Thanks to my speakers. Fantastic panel, fantastic conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, TM. Bye, Chevy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.